Welcome back. Does our human reason, our ability to think, have a place in our Christian faith life? Well, it all depends on how our reason is used. In this video, you will hear the words ministerial and magisterial applied to reason and the critical difference between them. While reason cannot create or strengthen faith, it has several roles in our lives as Christians. One of these roles is in defending the Christian faith. Let's take a look. God gave us our ability to reason. We should use that gift in ways that are pleasing to God. In our previous lesson, we talked of Christians who reject the true history of creation and replace it with a man-made story about millions of years. As we saw, this approach denies key doctrines of Scriptures and is harmful to faith. This is not a proper use of reason. What then is the role of reason? Our reason can be used in either a ministerial or a magisterial way. The word ministerial at its core means servant. We use our reason in a servant-like capacity to understand what God is telling us in His Word. The ministerial use of reason allows Scripture to have the last word, and that is the correct way to use our reason. In contrast, the magisterial use of reason is just the opposite. It places reason as the magistrate or judge over Scripture. It gives the last word, not to Scripture, but to human intellect. And that's wrong. Sadly, many Christian churches use reason in a magisterial way that results in unbiblical teaching. For most people, the word apology means to excuse yourself or ask for forgiveness for something you did. There's another meaning for this word. An apology, and also the related word apologetics, are a defense of the Christian faith, often using claims from outside of Scripture, such as logical reasoning from science or history. Such claims do not in any way increase the effectiveness of the gospel, but Scripture shows a place for them in our apologetic. Apologetics can remove barriers to the gospel. One way that apologetics does this is by reducing temptations. The following is a good example of that very point. When a high school student asks how 1,000,000 species of animals could possibly have fit into Noah's Ark, well, I might be tempted to say, I don't know. God can do impossible things. Now, my statement is correct, but this student may live with constant evolutionary attacks on her faith. Why allow this child to face great temptations when a few statements from reason may minimize that temptation? Natural selection, which we will study in this video series, show how the estimated 40,700 species of amphibians, birds, mammals, and reptiles alive today could have descended from an estimated 627 kinds of those animals on Noah's Ark. The ark then was larger than it even needed to be. While apologetics can be of use in defending Scripture, it's important to remember that God works only through the gospel to create and strengthen faith. The gospel is the good news that Jesus lived and died in our place so that we can spend eternity with God in heaven. The gospel is found only in the Word, the Bible, and in the sacraments, baptism and Holy Communion. We call the Word and the sacraments the means of grace because they are the way, the means that God gives us His grace, His undeserved love. Human reason and apologetics are not, finally, a means of grace. But apologetics can help believers by reducing temptations and helping to understand spiritual truths. In places like 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and 15, Paul uses logical reasoning when talking to believers. Evolution is a strong temptation for many Christians, leading them to question Scripture. Apologetics may greatly reduce that temptation. And apologetics can be of value in witnessing to unbelievers. That is, if it leads to an opportunity for sharing the gospel message. And Peter and Paul sometimes preceded their gospel message with logical reasoning. Apologetics may also be useful in silencing certain objections to the validity of Scripture. Jesus repeatedly used logical reasoning to silence unbelievers. But again, let us remember, while witnessing to unbelievers, the only role of apologetics is to open doors for the gospel. Our goal is to present the gospel message, not to discuss creation or evolution. And this leads to two things that we as Christians will want to avoid. First, most creationists correctly see evolution as a danger to the Christian faith. Sadly, some of these Christians attempt to create or strengthen faith by using science to prove that creation is true. That must be avoided. Christians who emphasize the biblical truth that nature, the created world, testifies that God is almighty, often overlook another truth, namely that only the gospel can create and sustain faith. But then some other Christians go too far on the other side, concluding that there is no place at all for reason in their defense of the faith, and this must also be avoided. Reason, as we saw before, is not a means of grace, but it can be used to remove barriers to the gospel, the very gospel that is the power of God unto salvation. Until the next time, God's blessings.